certain periods before the election, and they fail to file those reports. Or independent expenditure committees have kind of a separate scheme. Donors to those committees who are donating $1,000 or more have to file their own individual donor report. So we'll often see some complaints related to a donor's failure to file their own report for an independent expenditure committee. Excuse me. Some of the other categories we see are prohibited contributions. That's those first two bullets. One is that a lobbyist is contributing to a candidate committee, or a corporation is contributing to a candidate committee. So while corporations are allowed to contribute to political committees and independent expenditure committees, they are a prohibited contribution under Colorado law to a candidate committee. And then, maybe receiving contributions in excess of a contribution limit. And then we have prohibited contributions from political subdivision. That actually makes up a fair amount of cases that we receive. That's typically a situation where a local board of county commissioners or school board has done some activity where they think they're spending money in furtherance of, it's typically not a candidate, it's typically some sort of, tabor issue, so some sort of ballot measure that's going on in the local community. And then we have some others. There are actually really very few others. There was at least one complaint where a candidate had two candidate committees open at the same time. You have like a 10-day window to close your previous candidate committee and open a new candidate committee, and the candidate had failed to do that. And we occasionally get failed to put a paid-for-by statement on some sort of flyer or some sort of electioneering communication, and folks think that they really should be saying who it is that put this out. So those are the main categories of cases. I'm not a statistician, but I put together this little chart that kind of shows representation. So this is of the last 5 years, so from 2012 to the present, the types of cases that we see and how many of them. So you'll see this big part is that failure to report or disclose portion. Failure to register and failure to file reports, this red and orange, are I think neck and neck. They're almost the exact same number of cases, so they get about the same amount of those. And then smaller portions of the prohibited contribution piece. And so that's just kind of to give you an idea of what types of cases are out there, what's getting filed. And as I said, it's not perfect because, of course, if you have failure to register, you probably also have a failure to file report allegation in the complaint. Yes?
What percentage of those complaints are from a single complaint?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, so we have a question, what percentage of those complaints are from a single complainant? I don't know the total. I know in 2014, that 50 cases was, I believe, either 32 or 36 from a single complainant. I would say, majority from 2014 to 2016, I would feel safe in saying that more than half are filed by a single complainant. But in that tracer search that I showed you earlier, you're able to go in and look at that specifically. Okay, so this is the case update part where I said I'm going to kind of repeat some of the things. There may be a few new things here. Some of the things that Ed and Scott talked about earlier today. So right now, and please do, if anybody is litigating a case that I'm not aware of or has more information on any of these cases, please feel free to chime in and start a discussion about it. These are the 4 cases that I know of that are currently pending in the Colorado Court of Appeals. So just a little bit about these particular cases. So the first case is the most recent case, and that's Campaign Integrity Watchdog versus Colorado Republican Committee. And this particular case deals with or at least the issue on appeal is a contributor or an individual who wrote a check to the Colorado Republican Committee for $350 for a table at the convention. And the complaint was filed. In part, one of the allegations was that the Colorado Republican Committee should have listed that as a contribution on its contribution and expenditure report. So typically, our office's guidance in the past has been, in the instance of, a dinner or something like that, the portion of what was paid that is over and above fair market value of what was received. So if we know that the dinner was worth $25 or $50 and you paid $100 to attend the event, our guidance has been that only the portion above and beyond the fair market value of what the person received is considered a contribution and needs to be reported on a contribution and expenditure report. This case actually says that, well, one, this was a little bit different because it was a table and it wasn't, an actual meal or a good, but essentially the Republican Committee argued that it was a service that the individual received when he made the payment, and the fair market value of that was the $350, and therefore they didn't need to list it as a contribution. The ALJ said no, the full amount of the $350 needed to still be listed as a contribution. I think part of it was that they found that there was no evidence to show what the fair market value of that table was. But Colorado Republican Committee has appealed that decision and to determine whether that full amount of the what the individual gave is considered a contribution and needs to be reported, or whether it's something, I think their argument is that it should be something above and beyond what they've received for that. So you may have any questions about that case. So that's a new case. I think that was just recently appealed in the last month or two. So we don't know any. And none of these are really, I think they're all kind of in a holding pattern. So our second case so you can see we have the same complainant in each of these cases. The second is Colorado Citizens Protecting Our Constitution. This is a case where the complainant appealed the decision holding that the respondent did not have a major purpose of supporting or opposing political candidates. So in that case, CCPOC is a 501c4 organization. It has, its articles of incorporation, which say it's basically an educational outreach organization, and that, its major purpose is not to support or oppose political candidates. And so the ALJ held a hearing in that case. Evidence was presented. CCPOC successfully showed that, I think it was only maybe 33.5 something, a third of its capital went to supporting or opposing political candidates. The rest went to issue advocacy. And so in that case, the ALJ found that Campaign Integrity Watchdog had not proven that CCPOC's major purpose was supporting or opposing candidates, and as a result, they did not have to register with our office as a political committee. So Campaign Integrity Watchdog has appealed that decision, and again, that's pending in the Court of Appeals and could have an interesting result. Any questions about that one? All right, our third and fourth are really both about the larger issue that Ed and Scott were talking about earlier today, and it's about that, at what point do attorney's fees for litigation expenses post when you are actually conducting political activity or supporting or opposing a candidate, at what point do those payments of litigation costs or attorney's fees become something that is not required to be listed on a contribution and expenditure report. So both of these cases dealt with, well, they're a little bit different because, Alliance for Safe and Independent Woodmen Hills is considered to be a political committee, and the Republican Party IEC is a person IEC, And so there are a little bit different reporting and disclosure requirements for those two different types of committees. But in both instances, the ALJ found that the money spent to defend a campaign finance complaint or other litigation issues post kind of when their election was going on is not considered a contribution or expenditure that needs to be reported under Colorado's campaign finance laws. And so both of those cases are very, I guess, in the same grain as this first case, which is currently pending in the Supreme Court, which is the one they were mostly focusing on this morning, which is Coloradans for a Better Future versus Campaign Integrity Watchdog. So that is in the briefing stage at the Supreme Court right now, and that is, the two that are at the Court of Appeals have some nuances to this particular issue, but essentially whether or not the Court of Appeals, so in this case, there were about 4, I think, cases initiated in the Office of Administrative Courts against Coloradans for a Better Future. And so, they kind of got caught in a loop of, the original complaint was related to actual activity, and then, they didn't disclose either payment of fines or penalties or fees or legal fees, and, got in a cycle of complaints continuing to be filed against them. And so the administrative law judge found that they did not need to report those contributions. The Colorado Court of Appeals reversed that decision and said that those either reduced costs, pro bono, legal fees did have to be reported as contributions or in-kind contributions on the committee's report. And so that's been appealed to the Supreme Court and is currently briefing. So that'll be a really interesting decision, and I think will guide probably the Court of Appeals in the previous 2 cases, because they are very similar issues. So you have any questions about that? I know they talked about that at length earlier today. Okay, and then Kime versus Douglas County School District is the other campaign finance case that I know of that's pending in the Supreme Court. This one is actually set for oral argument coming up in a few weeks. So this is a little bit different. This is essentially a 145-117 complaint in its origination. Julie Kime filed a complaint against Douglas County School District what happened in background is the Douglas County School District commissioned a report or a white paper from a vendor related to the school district's activities and, touting the reforms that had been made prior to the last iteration of the school board being elected. Julie Kime was a challenger. I think she was running for school board, but wasn't within that reform slate of candidates. And so she alleged that, so essentially they commissioned a report, they spent $15,000 ultimately of the school district's money to pay for that report, and then they disseminated, once it was finalized, they disseminated the report via their e-newsletter to about 85,000 Douglas County residents. So Julie Kime complained that that was essentially a contribution given to the reform slate of candidates, because it went out, I think, sometime in September prior to the November school board election. And so in this case, if my recollection serves me, the ALJ found that was a violation. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. That was a violation of 145-17, that was a thing of value given to that reform slate of candidates.
Can you just explain what 145, 117 is? 'Cause I don't think we
Yes.
talked about that.
So essentially 145-17, Suzanne asked that I explain it, it is a political subdivision from the local level all the way up to, say the Secretary of State's office can't use public funds to support or oppose candidates, to support or oppose a certain number of ballot measures. So, if the school board or the Board of County Commissioners is trying to initiate a mill levy for something, they can't then spend their money, or district money to further that, they can give, there, 145.117 sets out a number of things that they can do. They can give, factual summaries of a ballot measure, or, if there are two candidates that they want to support. They get to spend a minimal amount of money in responding to constituents asking questions about a particular measure, but they can't spend district money or public funds essentially to play politically, to support or oppose a candidate, or support or oppose an issue. And so that's essentially what this complaint alleged. So this got appealed and is now ultimately in the Supreme Court. And I've copied essentially what the issues on appeal and the Supreme Court briefing are, because the Court of Appeals found that it wasn't a thing of value given directly or indirectly to those particular candidate committees. And so that will also, I think, be a really interesting decision. These types of cases have been, I would say, all over the board, particularly in light of, and I think a trend that we've seen, Facebook, social media, people or districts using those sorts of platforms, whether or not there's some value to that. This was an email that went out to 85,000 residents. Is that, what's the cost of that, having those 85,000 emails to start with, to distribute it to? Is there some intrinsic value to that? And does that then, using that information create something of value for a candidate or, on a ballot issue? So this will be interesting. I don't know if this case will specifically address all of those issues, but we struggle with giving guidance to folks who call and want to know, if I put this on Facebook, is somebody going to file a complaint against me? And, we don't know what to say about that necessarily all the time. So again, another case that they talked about this morning, this is in the U.S. District Court. This is a challenge to Colorado's private enforcement system. Tammy Holland is the plaintiff in this case, and a little bit of background on this is that she, this is really also a local issue. Ms. Holland didn't like some of the things that were happening in her local school district, and she took out some ads in her local newspaper against some of those candidates, I think, or the local school board, and she found herself, so she did this individually, she took out some ads, she didn't identify who she was, but somehow people found out who it was that took out the ads, and she had 2 campaign finance complaints filed against her back to back, both of which she won, but as a result of